Welcome to our third EUCERS ISD Konrad Adenauer Foundation Energy Talk in 2015 on the subject, as you remember, the re-emerging or emerging energy superpower. Today we have Brazil, another huge player, important country, one of the BRIC countries, very strong player in Latin America, clearly the number one, but also on the world scene, an important player with a lot of fields that we do not see in other countries, like the bioethanol thing. When it comes to mobility, Brazil is completely different than the rest of the world, and I think we can all learn from Brazil and acknowledge it as an energy superpower. That's the reason why we're together.
There is a lot of energy innovation in Brazil, one of the first countries which on a large scale introduced ethanol, with all the controversial debate to produce energy versus producing food, and that's an ongoing process as well. A huge amount of hydro energy as well. And the recent discussion if and for what cost Brazil might become even an oil exporting superpower, with all the difficulties of the deep sea oil in front of the Brazil shores. So there's a lot of interesting questions, at least, and how Brazil is going to face these challenges, and in what dimension Brazil is going to play and continue to play this international role as an energy superpower is one of the, I think, of the central questions we would like to discuss today.
As you know, Brazil was one of the key countries to actually introduce into the international debate the concept of sustainable development, and this is very much relevant also to our energy sector. In all areas of policy making as well. Just to give a quick perspective of the Brazil's energy mix in relation to the world, Brazil is one of the single countries in the planet that has been able to have renewables as a main part of its energy mix traditionally, and even before the climate change debate entered into the international agenda. The energy mix of Brazil in relation to the world has some striking differences. Hydro plays a key element, so does cane and bioenergy, and other renewables as well. If we go to the electricity mix, the role of renewables is even more significant. It's over 75%. These are data from 2013. Historically, we have had the key role of hydro for electricity and of biofuels for transportation. Now biofuels is also very much relevant for electricity as well, but other colleagues will elaborate this further. And this makes the concept of the transition to low carbon economy in Brazil not so much applicable, because we have traditionally already been a very low carbon country in terms of energy.
Where is Brazil in this context? Thinking on biofuels specifically, the US is number one, 55 billion liters. Brazil is the second largest producer with 25% of the total market. So these two countries represent something around 70 or 73% of the total. Here we have two graphics. One is for ethanol and biodiesel. In biodiesel in Europe, there are also some leading countries, like Germany, for example, very strong, France. But in terms of ethanol, Brazil and the United States, they dominate this market, with some other countries also participating in this total. So as Túlio said, the current share of renewables in Brazil is already very high. It's about 42% of the total primary energy mix, right? And the world is about 13%. But this has also to do with the characteristics of the country, because Brazil has a lot of hydropower potential, a lot of land, etc. And also the government since the 70s and 60s and 70s focused on these sources, also to reduce dependence on oil. So currently Brazil has a strong renewables in share. Biomass, for example, is about 15% of the total primary energy mix. This is a long story with ethanol program, started in 75, then it was like vehicles that used only ethanol, then we moved to flex fuel vehicles. Now we are discussing more like, rather than a sugarcane mill, it's a sugarcane biorefinery. So we are discussing things like, not only discussing, but already producing bioplastics, second generation fuels, etc. Currently, Brazil is a leader in the production of these products with the United States, but we could be more aggressive in international trade of these products. So if we think on the land use, I adopted the Hubbard curve model, the oil sector, to the idea of land as a finite resource. If we use that land as a kind of oil reserve, we will have a kind of an S-curve and a bell curve with the land use peak. So Brazil has many years of potential expansion of this sector without affecting forest and other crops.
In relation to renewables, it's been a dominated story so far by hydro. We've seen quite a lot of biomass, and maybe in the last 10 years or so there's been quite a lot of wind energy development in Brazil, but very little in terms of solar. And yet, Brazil has an abundant solar energy resource. It has about, in some of the states in the northeast particularly, we're talking about 6 kilowatt hours per square metre per day of solar irradiance, which is, to give you an idea, that's roughly double the United Kingdom. It's roughly double also Germany, where we have a lot of penetration of solar. So the resource in Brazil is enormous. Brazil's also ranking very highly as an investment destination for renewables in terms of the climate scope survey. So you'd think that solar ought to be a reasonably good choice in Brazil. So it's difficult to understand why there hasn't been much solar development so far. I think it makes up less than 1% today of the electricity mix in total. But probably the most plausible explanations lie in the nature of the support systems, both domestic and also international, for solar. And the Brazilian government did start probably 10 years ago with a very impressive feed-in tariff program called ProInfa. But the ProInfa program looked for lowest cost renewables. And 10 years ago, I think the cost curves of and the levelized cost curves of solar compared to wind, say, were very different. And so naturally, as a market-based mechanism, we saw the lowest cost technologies be deployed. So we've seen lots of wind development in Brazil, but very little solar. I think Brazil has a unique opportunity to declare, through its INDC, the type of contribution it can make and the type of development of solar it could make by using international resources for the time being to try and bridge this cost gap. And this would be very important in Brazil at the moment, and no doubt as the consultation process on Brazil's INDC concludes, we could expect to see a bit more movement in that area without wanting to preempt the outcomes.
Brazil is the 8th largest energy consumer in the world, the 10th largest producer. When we have here in Europe presentations or discussions at all on emerging powers, then it has certain kind of focus, of course, on Russia still, China, which is probably the most important determinant factor for worldwide energy policies today. India, I think we sometimes too much overlook, I think, those developments taking place. Brazil is still a little bit left out of this picture, and which maybe also reflects somehow the great potential both sides still have between Europe and Latin America and Brazil in particular, in enhancing the overall relationship, but particularly also in the energy field.
In 2003, President Lula became elected, came into office, and Brazil was living through a great phase, or a great boom phase. And luckily for Brazil, 3 major discourses were happening in the OECD countries. The question about energy security with rising oil prices and instability in the producing countries, question of climate change and a new form of south-south cooperation. Conveniently, ethanol diplomacy, the international promotion of ethanol as a fuel, was at the center of this triangle. And Brazil's official policy was to commodify ethanol. That means to create an international market for this biofuel. The main tool to do this is widening both the consumer base but also the producer base. So what are the prospects for an international market for ethanol? I would say on the good side we have technological advances. As Alexandre already mentioned, the advances in agrotechnology are huge, which can also be a model for other countries and other regions. In the case of sugar, sugar can be planted all around the tropical belt, so this can include African countries, Southeastern Asian countries. The second generation biofuels is a technological advance that is mainly done in cooperation with the US. That means that you basically can make ethanol now from the leftovers that you used to throw away. And a good sign for widening the consumer base is that ethanol nowadays is already used for aviation fuel. Quickly, the obstacles. One problem are the commodity prices that are not that easy to either predict or to influence. But then the good news is that the other two obstacles, non-tariff trade barriers and the question of sustainability, are political problems that can be solved in a political context.
Many of our speakers have mentioned not only the oil and gas sector, which are very traditionally covered in Europe and the United States, but also the renewable sector in Brazil. And as much as we can try to do that, it's not possible to just put those resources as something secondary when we're talking about the energy mix in Brazil. It's a reality for us. It has been a reality for us for at least 50 years. So we cannot talk about energy in Brazil and leave aside the renewable scenario. So, and this might, again, estrange Brazil from the rest of the world in a way, but it also shows how much Brazil, in my opinion, and I think we grasp this from the presentations of our colleagues here, has a two-way rationale when it comes to energy development. The first one is the renewables, which we have seen in Brazil for at least 50, 60 years. And the most prominent now that has called many people's attention is, of course, the oil and gas sector with the increased E&P operations in Brazil, the opening up of the sector since 1997, and the discoveries in the pre-salt layer. What does that represent? So we should also be careful when it comes to portraying Brazil as the champion of renewables. Of course, there is a long history of renewables in Brazil due to our natural characteristics that have led us to explore those resources because they're simply easier to explore. At the same time, much effort has been put into developing a strong E&P scenario. We are heavily offshore, but still we are talking about traditional fuels, traditional resources that show that Brazil actually doesn't have a natural tendency to go for renewables. It just happens to be that way. Of course, there is a whole history for that. Coming to ethanol, coming to hydropower, coming to solar energy, as our speakers have mentioned here. So why does Brazil see this as something so important? This is a very strong strategic move for Brazil. So there is a tendency in Brazil, two tendencies. First, a very important practical one, which is very common in every country, which is to diversify the resources it has so as to produce energy and to have this production as cheap and affordable as possible. The other one is strategic, concerning non-dependence, and this is a very strong point for South American countries in general, and this cannot be overlooked.